By noon tomorrow, your son is gone." The line echoed as Cindy dropped her phone, shaking, whispering the only truth she had left. "I need a husband by tomorrow." She didn't know the man standing inches behind her wasn't just listening, he was deciding whether to expose his empire or let her child disappear forever. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The rain pounded violently against the windows of the roadside diner that night, isolating the small establishment from the rest of the world. Cindy Widmer was there, hunched over the counter, clutching her smartphone as if it were the last thread connecting her to everything she loved. On the other end of the line, the voice of the social services investigator, Miss Hartley, sounded cold and procedural, driving every word like a nail into the coffin of her hope. "Miss Widmer, this isn't a negotiation. It's a legal assessment. Due to your documented history with domestic violence, your current unstable housing situation, and the lack of a recognized family structure, Judge Morrison was very clear in this afternoon's emergency hearing. If you cannot present lawful marriage documentation and proof of permanent residence by noon tomorrow, your son will be transferred into protective custody. You have exactly 14 hours. No house, no legal spouse, no child. Those are the court's terms." The call ended with a dry click. Cindy slowly pulled the phone away, feeling the blood freeze in her veins. She stared at the rain-streaked windows, her reflection ghostly and fragmented in the glass. Her waitress uniform tan with short sleeves and a collar that had seen better days hung loose on her thin frame. Her brown hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail, clung to her damp forehead. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. Like someone who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. She looked out at the dark parking lot where her 10-year-old sedan sat under the pouring rain, its back seat still stuffed with the blankets and bags they'd been living out of for the past 3 weeks. That was her home. That was the stability she had to offer her 6-year-old son. That was the future a judge was about to take away. The pain was so sharp she couldn't contain it. Cindy didn't scream in anger. She crumbled. She leaned her forehead against the cold laminate counter and began to cry, a convulsive, painful sob that shook her shoulders. The diner was nearly empty, the storm keeping most people away, and in that isolation, her desperation poured out uncensored. Between sobs, she let out the sentence that had been trapped in her throat, speaking just loud enough for the universe to hear her plea. "My God, I need a miracle. I need a husband and a house by tomorrow morning, or I'm going to lose my baby." Cindy's miracle was standing right behind her, but she didn't know it yet. The diner was quiet except for the rain, but at the booth directly behind Cindy, those words hit Romain Rueg like a physical blow to the chest. He hadn't planned to be there at all. He'd only stopped at this forgotten roadside diner to avoid a police checkpoint 2 miles up the highway, a routine maneuver for a man whose face appeared in Interpol briefings more often than family photographs. Romain sat with his back to the wall, as he always did, dressed in his signature black suit with no tie. The collar hung open, revealing the edge of intricate tattoos that climbed from his chest up his neck, dark ink that spoke of allegiances, debts paid, and wars won. More tattoos wrapped around his hands like warnings written in a language most people were too afraid to read. His dark hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp and unforgiving. He had the kind of face that made people look away, not because it was cruel, but because it was too controlled, too calm. The face of a man who had seen violence and chosen precision over chaos. His reputation in the underworld was surgical. He was called the Black Ledger because he settled debts others couldn't, ended wars without firing a shot, and controlled entire cities from the shadows without ever needing to raise his voice. He was a man who had built an empire on one rule: never get involved in innocent lives. But when he heard Cindy's broken plea, "I need a husband by tomorrow or I'm going to lose my baby," something inside him fractured. It was her voice, the raw desperation, the way she said baby like it was the only word left in her vocabulary that still meant anything. It reminded him of his mother. Romain stared down at the cold coffee in front of him, his jaw tight, his hands perfectly still on the table. He remembered the night his mother had begged a room full of men in expensive suits for help, men who had looked at her the way society looked at people like Cindy: disposable, inconvenient, not worth the risk. No one had helped her. Romain had been 7 years old, hiding behind her legs, watching her beg. He never forgot the look in her eyes when she realized no one was coming. That same look, he'd just heard it in Cindy's voice. He looked at the woman slumped over the counter, trembling as she tried to pull herself together. Her shoulders shook with each breath. She had no idea who was sitting behind her. No idea that the man watching her was someone most people crossed the street to avoid. But Romain knew exactly what was at stake. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, and walked toward the counter. His footsteps were silent despite his size. Cindy didn't notice him at first. She was too busy wiping her face with a paper napkin, trying to breathe through the panic. Then she heard his voice. Low, controlled, certain. "I can be your husband." Cindy froze. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it, that her mind had broken under the weight of everything and conjured some kind of auditory hallucination. But when she slowly turned her head, she saw him. A man in a black suit, tattoos crawling up his neck, dark eyes that watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch, not cruel, but unflinching. Serious. He stood there, 3 feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting. Cindy's first instinct was fear. Everything about him screamed danger. The tattoos, the suit, the way he stood like he owned the space around him. But his eyes, they weren't mocking her. They weren't pitying her. They were steady. "What?" Cindy whispered, her voice cracking. Romain didn't repeat himself. He simply held her gaze and waited for her to catch up. Cindy's mind raced. This had to be a joke. A cruel, sick joke from a stranger who'd overheard her breakdown and decided to. "I'm serious," Romain said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "You need a husband by tomorrow. I can be that." Cindy stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. And in that moment, she didn't know if she was looking at salvation or something far more dangerous. Cindy couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. The man stood there in his black suit, tattoos visible against his skin like battle scars turned into art, waiting with a patience that felt almost unnatural. He wasn't smiling, wasn't trying to reassure her. He'd made his offer, and now he was giving her space to decide, as if proposing marriage to a complete stranger in a roadside diner was the most reasonable thing in the world. You're joking," Cindy finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She wiped at her face again, suddenly aware of how she must look: red eyes, streaked makeup, uniform stained with ketchup from the dinner rush hours ago. "I don't joke," Romain said simply. There was something in his tone that made her believe him. No amusement, no mockery, just flat, undeniable truth. Cindy's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. I don't even know you. You don't know me. Why would you?" She stopped, shaking her head. "This is insane." "It is," Romain agreed. He pulled out the stool next to her and sat down, moving with the kind of controlled grace that suggested every action was calculated. Up close, she could see more details: the way his tattoos disappeared beneath his collar, the faint scar along his jawline, the darkness in his eyes that spoke of things she probably didn't want to understand. But insane doesn't mean impossible. Cindy laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "You're a complete stranger who just— What? Overheard me having a breakdown and decided to rescue me? That doesn't happen. People don't do that." "Most people don't," Romain said quietly. "I'm not most people." There was no arrogance in the statement, just fact. Cindy stared at him, trying to read him, trying to understand what kind of man made an offer like this. Nothing about him made sense. The expensive suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. The tattoos that suggested a life she wanted nothing to do with. The way he sat perfectly still, like a predator that had learned patience was more effective than violence. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who can help you," Romain said. "That's all you need to know right now." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one that matters tonight." Cindy wanted to stand up, walk away, get in her car, and drive until this entire nightmare felt like a fever dream. But where would she go? Back to the motel room she could no longer afford? Back to sleeping in her car with her son curled up in blankets in the back seat, asking when they could go home? She had 14 hours. Less now. 13, maybe. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? Romain was silent for a long moment. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time, Cindy saw something flicker behind those controlled eyes, something that looked like pain, old and buried deep. "Because I know what happens when no one helps," he said finally. The answer hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Cindy didn't fully understand but felt in her bones. This man had lived through something, had watched someone suffer because people looked away. "I can't pay you," Cindy said desperately. "I don't have money. I don't have anything. I'm not asking for payment. Then what do you want? Romain looked at her directly, and Cindy felt the full weight of his attention. It wasn't predatory. It was assessing, like he was measuring whether she was strong enough for what came next. Nothing, he said. You walk into that courtroom tomorrow with a marriage certificate, a permanent address, and a husband who can stand next to you when the judge asks questions. After that, you're free to leave. No strings, no obligations. It sounded too good to be true. It sounded like a trap. People don't just give things away, Cindy said. Especially not something this big. What's the catch? No catch, Romain said. Just rules. What rules? You don't ask about my work. You don't involve yourself in my business. You stay in the house I provide until the custody situation is resolved. After the court grants you custody, you decide whether you want to stay or leave. Cindy's mind spun. Stay? Why would I stay? You might feel safer there than out here, Romain said simply. But that's your choice to make, not mine. She studied his face, looking for deception, for the hidden angle that would explain why a man like this would offer salvation without demanding something in return. But all she saw was that same steady, unreadable calm. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, I should say no. You should, Romain agreed. But you won't. Cindy's breath caught. How do you know? Because you're not afraid of me, Romain said quietly. You're afraid of losing your son. And fear is a powerful motivator when it's aimed at the right target. He was right. God help her, he was right. Cindy thought of her son 6 years old, curly brown hair, gap-toothed smile, the way he held her hand too tight whenever they had to sleep in the car. She thought of him being taken away, placed in a system that would process him like paperwork, assigned to strangers who wouldn't know that he was afraid of thunderstorms, or that he needed his stuffed rabbit to fall asleep. She thought of never seeing him again. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. If I say yes, Cindy said slowly, and this is some kind of trap or trick, or it's not. How do I know that? Romain reached into his jacket slowly, so she could see his hands, and pulled out a business card. He set it on the counter between them. It was simple, elegant, just a name and a phone number. Romain Rueg. Cindy stared at the name. It sounded European, formal, expensive. You can look me up, Romain said. You can research. You can ask questions. But we don't have time for that tonight. You have 13 hours. I'm offering you 12 of them to make this work. Cindy picked up the card with shaking hands. Why are you really doing this? She asked one more time. Romain stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Because someone should have helped my mother, he said quietly. And no one did. He turned toward the door, then paused. I'll be outside. Take 5 minutes. Decide. And then he walked out into the rain, leaving Cindy alone with the most impossible decision of her life. Cindy sat frozen at the counter, staring at the business card in her trembling hands. The name Romain Rueg seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights. She could see him through the rain-streaked window, standing beside a black Mercedes she hadn't noticed before, perfectly still despite the downpour soaking his shoulders. He wasn't looking at her, wasn't pressuring her. He'd given her space to choose, and somehow that made it worse. Because she'd already made her choice the moment he'd walked away. Cindy's phone buzzed on the counter, a reminder alarm she'd set earlier. 12 hours until court. Her chest tightened. In 12 hours, a judge would ask her questions she couldn't answer. Would look at her with that same clinical detachment Miss Hartley had used on the phone. Would sign papers that would take her son away, unless she walked out that door. Her hands were still shaking as she grabbed her coat threadbare, 2 winters old, and pushed through the diner's entrance into the storm. Rain immediately plastered her hair to her face, cold and punishing. Romain turned as she approached, his dark eyes finding hers through the downpour. I have conditions, Cindy said, her voice stronger than she felt. Something flickered across Romain's face. Approval, maybe, or respect. Go ahead. I want everything in writing. The marriage, the terms, the timeline. I want to know exactly what I'm agreeing to. Done. I want my own room. My son stays with me. You don't come near him without my permission. Agreed. And when this is over, when the court gives me custody, I leave. No questions asked. No guilt. No strings. Romain held her gaze for a long moment, rain running down his face, darkening his suit. No strings, he confirmed quietly. Cindy felt something inside her shift, not relief, but the terrible weight of a choice she couldn't take back. Why does this feel like I'm making a deal with the devil? Because you probably are, Romain said. And for the first time, there was something almost like dark humor in his voice. But the devil keeps his promises, Cindy. Can you say the same about the system that's trying to take your son? She couldn't. She'd seen what the system did to children like hers shuttled between homes, lost in paperwork, their trauma documented but never healed. How do we even do this? Cindy asked, exhaustion and desperation bleeding into her voice. We can't get married in 12 hours. There are licenses, waiting periods, legal. I know people, Romain interrupted calmly. He opened the passenger door of the Mercedes. Get in. We'll handle it. Cindy stared at the open door, expensive leather seats, interior that probably cost more than every car she'd ever owned combined. This was the moment. Once she got in, there was no going back. She thought of her son's face, his small hand in hers, the way he said mommy like it was the safest word in the world. Cindy got in the car. The Mercedes moved through the rain-soaked streets with predatory silence. Romain drove with the same controlled precision he seemed to apply to everything, economical movements, perfect awareness of his surroundings. Cindy sat rigid in the passenger seat, hyper-aware of the man beside her, of the decision she'd just made, of how quickly her life had spiraled into something she no longer recognized. Where are we going? She asked. To handle the paperwork. At midnight? In the middle of a storm? I told you I know people. Cindy wanted to ask what kind of people took care of marriage licenses at midnight, but she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Instead, she focused on the city passing by outside familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, like she'd crossed into some parallel world where normal rules didn't apply. Why did you really stop at that diner? She asked quietly. Romain's jaw tightened slightly. Police checkpoint on Highway 7. I needed to wait it out. Were you running from something? I'm always running from something, Romain said. The trick is making sure it never catches you. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. They pulled up to an elegant townhouse in a neighborhood Cindy recognized as expensive, the kind where lawyers and doctors lived, where every house had security systems and property values that made her monthly salary look like pocket change. Romain parked and came around to open her door before she could do it herself. Who lives here? Cindy asked as they approached the entrance. Someone who owes me a favor. The door opened before Romain could knock. A middle-aged man in a expensive robe stood there, looking irritated until he saw who was on his doorstep. His expression immediately shifted to something between fear and respect. Romain, I wasn't expecting. I need a marriage license processed tonight, Romain said simply. Backdated to 2 weeks ago. Full documentation. The man's eyes widened. Tonight? That's highly irregular. The legal requirements alone can be expedited. Romain's tone didn't change, but something in it made the man step back. You've done it before, Thomas. You'll do it now. Thomas looked at Cindy, then back at Romain, clearly calculating risks she couldn't begin to understand. Finally, he nodded. Come in. This will take a few hours. Inside the townhouse, Cindy sat in a leather chair while Thomas, apparently a city clerk, with questionable ethics and obvious fear of Romain, worked at a computer, creating paperwork that should have taken weeks. Romain stood by the window, watching the street below. His posture relaxed but his attention absolute. This is illegal, isn't it? Cindy said quietly. Technically, Romain admitted without looking at her. And you're fine with that? I've done worse things for worse reasons. Cindy should have been horrified, should have walked out. But instead, she found herself asking, what happened to your mother? Romain went very still. For a long moment, Cindy thought he wouldn't answer. She needed help, he finally said, his voice soft and dangerous. She asked for it, begged for it, and every person who could have saved her chose not to get involved. They had their reasons, good reasons probably. Didn't want trouble, didn't want complications. What happened to her? She died, Romain said simply. Alone, afraid, believing no one cared enough to risk anything for her. Cindy's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Romain said, turning to face her. Be ready, because tomorrow, you're going to walk into that courtroom with me, and you're going to convince a judge that you're stable, secure, and worthy of keeping your son. Can you do that? Cindy thought about everything she'd been through. The abuse, the running, the sleeping in cars and skipping meals so her son could eat. The shame of being judged by people who'd never had to choose between pride and survival. Yes, she said firmly. Good. Romain's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then we'll make sure you win. Thomas looked up from his computer. It's done. You're legally married as of 2 weeks ago. Congratulations. Cindy stared at the printed documents, official seals, signatures, a marriage certificate that proclaimed her Mrs. Rieg. She'd just married a man whose last name she could barely pronounce, a man who scared city officials, a man who'd admitted to doing illegal things. And somehow, for the first time in months, Cindy felt like she might actually survive tomorrow. The rain had finally stopped by the time they left Thomas's townhouse, but the city streets were still slick and dark, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights like fractured mirrors. Cindy clutched the manila envelope containing her new identity marriage certificate, proof of address, documentation that declared her a stable, married woman with a permanent home. None of it felt real. "We need to pick up your son," Romain said as he navigated the Mercedes through the empty streets. "Where is he?" Cindy's heart clenched. "My neighbor's watching him. Mrs. Deborah. She lives in the apartment building where I used to live before." She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. "Before you couldn't afford rent anymore," Romain finished for her, his tone neutral, without judgment. "Yes. Address?" Cindy gave it to him, watching the neighborhoods change as they drove from expensive to moderate to the kind of area where people didn't ask too many questions and landlords accepted cash. Her old building looked sadder in the pre-dawn darkness, paint peeling, one security light flickering like it was gasping for air. "Stay in the car," Romain said. "He's my son. I'm coming." Romain looked at her, really looked at her, and Cindy saw him reassessing. "All right, but let me do the talking if anyone asks questions." They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, the stairwell smelling of old cooking and mildew. Cindy knocked softly on Mrs. Deborah's door, aware that it was nearly 2 a.m, hoping the elderly woman wouldn't be too angry. The door opened a crack, chain still attached. Mrs. Deborah's weathered face peered through, then softened when she saw Cindy. "Oh, honey, I was so worried. Is everything—" She stopped when she noticed Romain behind Cindy, her eyes widening at the sight of the tall man in the expensive suit, with tattoos climbing his neck. "Mrs. Deborah, this is my husband, Romain," Cindy said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "We're here to pick up Jamie." Mrs. Deborah's eyes darted between them, confusion evident. Cindy had never mentioned a husband, had barely mentioned anything about her personal life, except that she was running from something dangerous. "Your husband?" Mrs. Deborah repeated slowly. "It's complicated," Cindy said quietly, "but I promise I'll explain everything later." "Is Jamie asleep?" Mrs. Deborah studied Romain for a long moment, the kind of assessment only a woman who'd lived through hardship could make. Whatever she saw must have satisfied some internal criteria, because she nodded slowly and opened the door. "He's in the guest room. Fell asleep around 9. Sweet boy. Didn't cry once." Cindy's eyes stung with gratitude. "Thank you. For everything." She moved past Mrs. Deborah into the small apartment, navigating by memory to the guest room. Her son Jamie lay curled under a faded quilt, his dark curly hair spread across the pillow, his stuffed rabbit clutched against his chest. He looked so small, so innocent, so unaware that his entire world had nearly collapsed tonight. Cindy knelt beside the bed, gently brushing his hair back. "Jamie, sweetheart. Time to wake up." Jamie's eyes fluttered open, confused and drowsy. Then he saw her and his face broke into a sleepy smile. "Mommy, hey baby, we're going to our new house tonight. Can you wake up for me?" Jamie rubbed his eyes and sat up, still clutching his rabbit. Then he noticed Romain standing in the doorway, tall, imposing, dressed in black. Jamie's smile faltered, his small body pressing closer to Cindy. Romain seemed to sense the child's fear. He crouched down slowly, making himself less intimidating, and spoke in a voice Cindy had never heard him use before. Softer, gentler. "Hello, Jamie. My name is Romain. I'm a friend of your mom's. We're going to go to a safe place where you can sleep in a real bed. Does that sound okay?" Jamie looked at Cindy for confirmation. She nodded, forcing a smile. "It's okay, baby. He's helping us." Jamie studied Romain with the brutal honesty only children possess. "You have drawings on your neck." "I do," Romain said simply. "Do you like to draw?" Jamie nodded. "I draw dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are impressive. Maybe you can show me your drawings sometime." It wasn't much, but it was enough to ease the fear in Jamie's eyes. Cindy helped him into his jacket and shoes, gathering the few belongings they'd brought, a backpack of clothes, the stuffed rabbit, a picture book with torn pages. Everything they owned fit in one backpack. Mrs. Deborah pressed a paper bag into Cindy's hands at the door. "Snacks for the little one. You take care, honey. And you," she looked at Romaine. "You better be what she needs, or you'll answer to me." Romaine's expression didn't change, but Cindy caught the faintest hint of respect in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." The drive to Romaine's estate took 20 minutes, leading them away from the city into an area where properties were measured in acres rather than square feet. Jamie fell asleep again in the back seat, his head resting against Cindy's shoulder. She watched the neighborhoods change through the window from urban to suburban to something else entirely. When they turned through iron gates that opened automatically, Cindy's breath caught. The house, no. The estate rose from perfectly manicured grounds, like something from a magazine she'd never be able to afford. 3 stories of elegant architecture, stone and glass and deliberate design. Security cameras were visible but discreet. Landscape lighting illuminated paths and gardens. Everything screamed money and power and permanence. This was where she was supposed to convince a judge she lived? "This is your house," Cindy whispered as Romaine parked in a circular driveway. "Yes. It's too much. No judge will believe I live here. They'll think you married well," Romaine interrupted calmly. "Which, according to our paperwork, you did. 2 weeks ago." Before Cindy could respond, the front door opened. A man in his 50s emerged, fit, alert, wearing a simple black suit. His eyes swept the car with professional assessment before settling on Romaine with clear respect. "Sir, we weren't expecting you tonight." "Circumstances changed, Bernard," Romaine said, getting out of the car. "Mrs. Rieg and her son will be staying in the East Wing. Make sure the rooms are prepared. They'll need breakfast at 8, something child-friendly." "Mrs. Rueg." The name hit Cindy like a physical thing. Bernard's surprise lasted only a fraction of a second before his professional mask returned. "Of course, sir. I'll inform the staff." Romaine opened Cindy's door and carefully lifted Jamie from the back seat. The boy didn't wake, simply curled against Romain's chest with the trust only sleeping children possess. The contrast was startling, this dangerous man holding her son like he was made of glass. "Come," Romaine said quietly. "Let's get him to bed." Cindy followed him into the house, her wet shoes squeaking on marble floors. The interior was exactly what she'd expected: elegant, expensive, intimidating. High ceilings, original art, furniture that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire life. But it was also quiet, peaceful, safe. Romaine led her up a curved staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with closed doors, finally stopping at a suite of rooms that looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel. A bedroom with a massive bed, an attached bathroom with marble fixtures, and a connecting smaller bedroom clearly meant for a child. He laid Jamie gently on the child-sized bed, stepping back to let Cindy tuck him in. "Everything you need should be here," Romaine said quietly. "If it's not, there's an intercom panel by the door. Press the button and someone will assist." Cindy stared at the room, at the safety it represented, and felt tears threatening again. "I don't understand any of this." "You don't need to understand it tonight," Romaine said. "You need to sleep. Court is in 9 hours." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Cindy?" "Yes, you're safe here. Both of you. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're safe." And then he was gone, leaving Cindy alone in a room that cost more than her entire life, with her son sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Cindy didn't sleep. She couldn't. She spent the remaining hours before dawn sitting in a chair by Jamie's bed, watching her son breathe in the safety of clean sheets, and a room with no leaks, no cold drafts, no sounds of arguments bleeding through thin walls. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced through everything that could go wrong in court, every question the judge might ask, every crack in their story that could expose the truth. By the time pale morning light filtered through the curtains, Cindy felt hollowed out with exhaustion and fear. A soft knock at the door made her jump. A woman in her 40s entered, professional, kind-faced, wearing a simple gray dress. "Mrs. Rueg? I'm Helen, the house manager. Mr. Rueg asked me to help you prepare for court. I've brought clothing options and breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Mrs. Rueg." The name still felt like wearing someone else's skin. Helen laid out several outfits on the bed: conservative dresses, tailored jackets, everything in Cindy's size. How had they known? When had they had time to? "Mr. Rueg is very thorough," Helen said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "He wants you to feel confident today." Confident. Cindy almost laughed. She was about to walk into court with a man she'd known for less than 6 hours and convince a judge they were a stable married couple, but she showered in the marble bathroom, dressed in a navy dress that fit perfectly, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked different, put together, respectable, like someone who had her life under control. She looked like a lie. Downstairs, the dining room was brighter than she'd expected, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, a table that could seat 12 but was set for 3. Jamie was already there, sitting next to Romaine, eating pancakes, shaped like dinosaurs. The sight stopped Cindy in the doorway. Romaine was still in his black suit, a different one, she realized, freshly pressed, but he was leaning slightly toward Jamie, listening as her son explained something with animated hand gestures. The dangerous man from last night looked almost normal. "Mommy," Jamie spotted her, and his face lit up. "Look, they made T-Rex pancakes, and Mr. Romaine says there's a library with books about real dinosaurs." "That's wonderful, baby," Cindy said, moving to the table on shaking legs. Romaine stood as she approached, a small gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt strangely intimate. "Did you sleep?" he asked quietly. "No. Neither did I." He pulled out her chair. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Cindy sat, accepting coffee from a staff member who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. She forced herself to eat toast she couldn't taste, drinking coffee that did nothing to settle her nerves. "Court is at noon," Romaine said, his voice low enough that Jamie wouldn't hear. "My lawyers will meet us there at 11:30. They'll brief you on what to expect." "Your lawyers," Cindy repeated. "How many do you have?" "Enough." Before she could press further, Bernard appeared in the doorway, his expression tight with concern. "Sir, we have a situation." Romaine's entire demeanor shifted, the casual breakfast companion disappearing, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "What kind of situation?" Bernard glanced at Jamie, then at Cindy. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Cindy said, surprising herself. "If this affects Jamie, I need to know." Romaine studied her for a moment, then nodded to Bernard. "Report. There's been unusual activity this morning. 3 separate surveillance sweeps of the property perimeter, different vehicles but coordinated timing, and—" Bernard hesitated. "There's media presence at the courthouse, significantly more than normal for a custody hearing." Cindy's blood ran cold. "Media? How would they know about—" "Someone leaked it," Romaine said, his voice dangerously calm. "Someone wants this public. But why? Who would—" Cindy stopped as realization hit. Derek. Her ex-partner. The man she'd been running from. The corporate witness protected by the state. Living in luxury while she'd been sleeping in her car. "He's seen the paperwork," Cindy whispered. "The marriage certificate. He knows I'm connected to you now." Romaine's jaw tightened. What exactly does he have to gain from exposing this? Cindy's hands trembled around her coffee cup. Revenge. Control. He swore I'd never escape him. If he can't have me, he'll destroy any chance I have at stability. And if he's connected you to me. She looked up at Romaine, fear coursing through her. "He'll use you to prove I'm unfit, that I'm still involved with dangerous people." "I am dangerous," Romaine said simply. "But not to you, not to your son. The judge won't see it that way. If Derek's lawyers present evidence that you're—" She couldn't even say it, couldn't voice what she suspected about Romaine's real work. Bernard cleared his throat. "There's more, sir. We've intercepted communications suggesting rival interests have taken notice of your change in status." "Which interests?" "The Kovach family. The Eastern Syndicate. They're questioning why the Black Ledger suddenly has a wife and child. Some are seeing it as a vulnerability." Jamie continued eating his dinosaur pancakes, oblivious to the adult conversation happening above his head. But Cindy heard every word, felt every implication like a knife. "I've made you a target," she whispered. "No," Romaine said firmly. "You've given them something to miscalculate. There's a difference. How can you be so calm? They could use this against us in court. They could try," Romaine interrupted, his eyes meeting hers with absolute certainty. "Let them." Bernard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, perhaps we should postpone the hearing. Give ourselves time to control the narrative." "No," Cindy said immediately. "We can't postpone. If we don't show up today, I lose Jamie automatically. The judge ruled it has to be today." "Then we go today," Romaine said. "Bernard, increase security. I want a full detail at the courthouse. And contact Mitchell, tell him to prepare for aggressive opposition. Sir, if the media connects you to organized, they won't prove anything they can't already prove, Romaine said coldly. I've been careful. My legal exposure is minimal. What they'll find is a businessman who stepped away from questionable associations months ago. That's the story. That's what the records will show. Because you planned this, Cindy said slowly. You've been preparing to go legitimate. I've been preparing for a lot of things, Romaine admitted. This just accelerated the timeline. A phone rang Bernard's. He answered, listened, his face darkening. Understood. He ended the call and looked at Romaine. Derek Mitchell, Cindy's ex-partner, just gave an interview to the Morning News. He's claiming you're a known criminal, and that Cindy married you to hide assets and maintain dangerous connections. Cindy felt the room spin. No. He's also requesting emergency custody, Bernard continued. His lawyers are arguing that the child is now in immediate danger due to exposure to criminal elements. Jamie looked up from his pancakes, sensing the tension. Mommy, are you okay? Cindy forced a smile, her face feeling like plastic. I'm fine, baby. Finish your breakfast. But she wasn't fine. Everything was collapsing. Derek had found her weak point and was exploiting it perfectly. By connecting her to Romaine, he'd turned her salvation into her damnation. Romaine stood, his movements controlled but radiating barely contained fury. Bernard, get Mitchell on the phone. Now. Sir, your lawyers would advise against direct contact. Now. Within 2 minutes, Bernard handed Romaine a phone. Cindy watched as Romaine's expression went perfectly, terrifyingly blank. Mitchell, this is Romaine Rueg. A pause. Yes, that Rueg. I'm calling about the interview you gave this morning, the one where you made claims about my wife. Cindy could hear raised voice on the other end, Derek's voice aggressive and smug. Romaine's response was ice. I'm going to say this once. Drop your custody claim, drop your media campaign, walk away. Because if you continue this path, I will dedicate considerable resources to ensuring every illegal thing you've ever done, every corner you've cut, every lie you've told your handlers becomes public record. Your protection only extends as far as your usefulness. Make yourself more trouble than you're worth, and they'll feed you to the wolves themselves. Silence on the other end. That's what I thought, Romaine said quietly. See you in court. He ended the call and handed the phone back to Bernard. When he looked at Cindy, his eyes were still hard, but his voice softened slightly. This isn't over, but neither are we. Cindy wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that anything could overcome what was coming. But as she held Jamie close and watched Romaine make calculated calls to lawyers and security teams, she couldn't shake the feeling that by accepting his help, she'd stepped into a war she didn't understand. And wars always had casualties. The hours before court moved too fast and too slow simultaneously. Cindy found herself in Romaine's private office, a room of dark wood and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves sitting across from 2 lawyers who looked like they billed by the minute. Mitchell Thorne, the lead attorney, was in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that had argued before Supreme Courts. His associate, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Yates, took notes on a tablet, while Mitchell walked them through what was coming. The opposition will attack from 3 angles, Mitchell said, his tone clinical. First, they'll question the legitimacy of your marriage, how quickly it happened, the convenience of timing. Second, they'll try to connect Mr. Rueg to criminal activity. Third, and most damaging, they'll argue that Jamie is now in proximity to dangerous elements. Cindy felt sick. Can they win? They can try, Mitchell said. Our job is to ensure they fail, which means you two need to be flawless. The judge will be watching every interaction, every response. You need to convince her that this marriage, while sudden, is genuine. How do we do that? Cindy asked. We've known each other less than 12 hours. Then you learn everything you need to know in the next 3, Rebecca said, not unkindly. We start now. For the next 2 hours, they rehearsed. Rebecca fired questions rapid fire, while Mitchell observed, taking notes on body language, hesitations, anything that might raise suspicion. How did you meet? Cindy looked at Romaine. They'd discussed this briefly in the car, but now, under scrutiny, it felt impossibly fragile. At the diner where I work, Cindy said. He came in regularly for coffee. We started talking. When was your first date? 3 weeks ago, Romaine answered smoothly. I took her to Giuliana's, Italian restaurant on 5th Street. Cindy blinked. That was specific. Had he actually researched restaurants to make the story believable? What did she order? Rebecca pressed. Romaine didn't hesitate. She said she wasn't hungry. Ordered soup. She was nervous. It was such a small detail, but it felt real, the kind of thing a man would remember about someone he cared for. Cindy realized Romaine was building a story that fit her personality, her circumstances. A woman too anxious to eat on a first date with a man who clearly had money. "Why did you marry so quickly?" Mitchell asked. "Because when you know," Romaine said simply. And Cindy needed stability. "I could provide it." "Why wait?" "The judge will call that convenient," Rebecca warned. "The judge can call it whatever she wants," Romaine said. "It's the truth, except it wasn't." And they all knew it. "Your turn, Cindy," Mitchell said. "What's Romaine's morning routine?" Cindy's mind went blank. She'd spent one night in his house. She had no idea. "Coffee, black, at 5:30, Romaine said quietly, feeding her the answer. "I read news on my tablet for 30 minutes. Exercise at 6, shower at 7. I'm usually dressed by 7:30. Cindy repeated it, committing it to memory. But Rebecca shook her head. "You're reciting. A wife would know this naturally. Add details. Personal observations." Cindy tried again. He wakes up early, before dawn, drinks his coffee black while reading the news. He's disciplined about exercise, won't skip it, even when he's busy." She paused, then added something she'd noticed that morning. "He's quiet in the morning, not unfriendly, just thoughtful. Like he's preparing for the day." Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Better. That felt real. Because it was real." Cindy had observed those things, even if she was just learning them. They continued for another hour. Favorite foods, sleep patterns, small arguments they might have had. The prosecution would look for cracks, for moments where their stories didn't align or their knowledge of each other seemed shallow. But something strange was happening. As they rehearsed, as Romaine supplied details and Cindy absorbed them, the lie started feeling less like a lie. She was learning him the way he thought, the precision of his mind, the unexpected gentleness beneath the controlled exterior. "Break," Mitchell finally announced. 15 minutes. "You're doing well, but we need to address the elephant in the room." He looked directly at Romaine. "They're going to bring up your past, your associations. We need to know, how bad is it?" Romaine's expression didn't change. "Nothing they can prove in court. I've been careful. My businesses are legitimate. My taxes are paid. Any connections to questionable activities are circumstantial at best." "Circumstantial can still damage credibility," Rebecca said. "Then we don't run from it," Romaine said. "We acknowledge it. I was involved in things I'm not proud of. I've since distanced myself. Reformed. That's a narrative judges appreciate redemption." "And if they have evidence?" Mitchell pressed. "They don't." The certainty in Romaine's voice was absolute. Mitchell studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll use it. Paint you as a man who walked away from a dark past to build something legitimate. That plays well, especially when combined with the protective husband narrative." After the lawyers left to finalize courtroom strategy, Cindy and Romaine were alone in the office. The silence felt heavy. "You're good at this," Cindy said quietly. "The lying, the details. It comes naturally to you." "It's survival," Romaine said. "When you grow up the way I did, you learn to build stories people want to believe." "What way did you grow up?" Romaine was silent for a long moment. Then, "Poor, violent. My mother worked 3 jobs and it still wasn't enough. My father was absent. And when he wasn't absent, he was worse than absent." Cindy heard the weight behind those carefully chosen words. "That's why you helped me. Because of your mother." "Yes." "What would she think of this? Of you?" Romaine's jaw tightened. "She'd probably tell me I was being reckless, that I was risking everything I built for someone I don't know. And what would you tell her?" Romaine finally looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted. "I'd tell her that some risks are worth taking, that not every calculation is about profit and loss, that sometimes." He trailed off, seeming to catch himself. "Sometimes what?" Cindy pressed. "Sometimes protecting someone matters more than protecting yourself." The words hung between them, intimate and dangerous. Cindy felt something shift in her chest, not attraction, exactly, but recognition. This man understood what it meant to fight for survival, understood the cost of choosing vulnerability. A knock at the door broke the moment. Helen appeared. "Mr. Ruegg, the cars are ready, and Jamie is asking for his mother." Cindy stood, smoothing her dress. "How do I look? Like someone who belongs here?" Romaine stood as well, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease. You look like someone who's survived things that would break most people. The judge will see that. So will everyone else. Is that good or bad? It's honest, Romaine said. And right now, that's all we have. They found Jamie in the foyer with Bernard, holding his stuffed rabbit and looking small in his nice clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt that Helen must have procured. He brightened when he saw Cindy. Are we going to see the judge now? He asked. Yes, baby. Remember what we talked about? You're going to be very brave and answer their questions truthfully. Will you be there? The whole time, Cindy promised, kneeling to hug him. I'm not going anywhere. Jamie looked at Romaine over Cindy's shoulder. Will you be there too? Romaine crouched down, meeting Jamie at eye level. Yes. I'll be right next to your mom. And I promise no matter what happens in that room, you're safe. Understand? Jamie nodded solemnly. Then, with the unself-conscious trust only children possess, he reached out and took Romaine's hand. The gesture seemed to surprise Romaine. For just a moment, his controlled mask slipped, and Cindy saw something raw in his expression, vulnerability, maybe even fear. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar calm certainty. Let's go, Romaine said, standing. Time to win. They walked out together, a manufactured family built on lies and desperation, walking into a courtroom that would decide if those lies were strong enough to become truth. And as they climbed into the Mercedes, surrounded by security and lawyers and the weight of impossible stakes, Cindy realized something terrifying. She was starting to believe the lie herself, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. The courthouse steps were swarming with media. Cindy saw them through the tinted windows of the Mercedes cameras, microphones, reporters jostling for position like predators sensing blood. Her stomach dropped. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't walk through that. Romaine's hand found hers, firm and steady. Yes, you can. Keep your head up. Say nothing. Let them see you're not afraid, but I am afraid. Then fake it, Romaine said, his voice low and certain. I'll be right beside you. They can take pictures, but they can't touch you. The car stopped. Bernard opened the door, and suddenly the roar of questions hit like a physical wave. Mrs. Ruegg, is it true you married a known criminal? Cindy, how do you respond to allegations of endangering your child? Mr. Ruegg, are you using this woman as a cover for… Romaine stepped out first, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was a wall of controlled menace in his black suit, his tattooed hand visible as he reached back to help Cindy out. The cameras exploded with flashes. Cindy took his hand and emerged, keeping her chin up like he'd instructed. Jamie pressed against her other side. She felt exposed, violated, every lens trained on her like weapons. But Romaine's hand never left hers as they walked through the gauntlet, security forming a corridor through the chaos. The questions kept coming, accusations dressed as inquiries, but Romaine moved through them like they didn't exist. His face was perfectly blank, his stride unhurried. To anyone watching, he looked like a man with nothing to hide. Inside the courthouse, the noise finally cut off as heavy doors closed behind them. Cindy's legs were shaking. Jamie buried his face against her stomach, overwhelmed. You did well, Romaine said quietly. Both of you. Mitchell and Rebecca were waiting by the courtroom entrance, both looking grim. They're playing for blood, Mitchell said without preamble. Derek's legal team just filed an emergency motion to have Jamie removed from your custody immediately before the hearing even begins. They're arguing imminent danger. On what grounds? Romaine demanded. Your presence, Rebecca said. They've compiled a dossier. Associates you've had, businesses you've been connected to, surveillance photos, nothing that directly proves criminal activity, but enough to paint a disturbing picture. Cindy felt her world tilting. Can they do that? Just take him before we even get a chance to. The judge will hear arguments first, Mitchell interrupted. But I won't lie to you, this just got significantly harder. They entered the courtroom. It was smaller than Cindy expected, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. Every eye would be on them, every reaction scrutinized. Derek was already there, sitting with his lawyers at the opposing table. He looked good, healthy, well-dressed, the picture of stability. When he saw Cindy, his smile was cold and triumphant. This was what he'd wanted all along. Not Jamie, not family, just the satisfaction of destroying her. Cindy's hands clenched into fists. Romaine noticed, leaning close to whisper, "Don't give him the reaction he wants. Stay calm." They took their seats. Jamie sat between them, clutching his rabbit. A social worker appeared, Miss Hartley, the same cold voice from the phone, and took Jamie to a separate waiting area where he'd stay during the proceedings. Mommy? Jamie's voice was small, frightened. I'll come get you soon, baby, I promise. The door closed behind him, and Cindy felt like her heart was being torn from her chest. Romaine's hand found hers again under the table, hidden from view. The gesture was small but anchoring. All rise. Judge Morrison entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every manipulation, every lie, every desperate gambit. Be seated. Her voice was firm, brooking no nonsense. Let's be clear about what we're doing here. This is an emergency custody hearing regarding the minor child, Jamie Widmer. I've reviewed the initial filings, and I'm disturbed by several aspects of this case. Cindy's heart hammered. Already it was going badly. Judge Morrison continued. Miss Widmer, or should I say Mrs. Ruegg, you presented yourself yesterday as a single mother in unstable housing. Today you appear with a husband, a marriage certificate dated 2 weeks ago, and residence at one of the most expensive estates in the county. The timing is, to put it mildly, suspicious. Mitchell stood. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. Sit down, counselor. I'm not finished. The judge's eyes fixed on Romaine. Mr. Rigg, your reputation precedes you. While I cannot speak to allegations that have never resulted in charges, I can say that your sudden involvement in this case raises serious questions about the environment this child would be entering. Derek's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit named Harrison Webb, stood smoothly. Your Honor, if I may present our evidence regarding Mr. Ruegg's associations. You may, Judge Morrison said. What followed was a systematic assassination. Webb presented surveillance photos, Romaine meeting with known figures from organized crime families, financial records showing money moving through complex corporate structures, testimony from law enforcement officials describing Romaine as a person of interest in multiple ongoing investigations. None of it was proof, but all of it was damning. Cindy watched Romaine's face remain perfectly controlled, but she could feel the tension in his hand. This was worse than they'd expected. Webb was building a narrative that painted Romaine as exactly what he'd spent years becoming, a criminal power broker who operated in shadows. Your Honor, Webb concluded, we're not asking this court to prove Mr. Ruegg guilty of any crime. We're simply asking, is this the environment for a 6-year-old child? A home surrounded by armed security, surveillance, and a man whose associations are, at best, questionable? He turned to Cindy, and his expression shifted to something almost pitying. Miss Widmer, we understand you were desperate, but desperation led you to make a dangerous choice. Our client, Mr. Mitchell, has a stable home, legal employment, and most importantly, no connection to criminal elements. He can provide what this child needs: safety. Your client is an abuser, Cindy said, the words bursting out before she could stop them. He put me in the hospital twice. Miss Widmer, Judge Morrison's voice cut through. You'll have your chance to testify, but these allegations against Mr. Mitchell were investigated and deemed unsubstantiated because he threatened me into silence. Cindy's voice broke. Because the system protected him instead of... Mrs. Ruegg, Mitchell stood, his voice firm but not unkind. Let me handle this. But the damage was done. Cindy saw it in the judge's face, the flicker of doubt, the assessment of a woman who appeared unstable, emotional, willing to make desperate accusations. Webb pressed his advantage. Your Honor, this outburst demonstrates exactly what we're concerned about. Miss Widmer's judgment is compromised. She's aligned herself with a dangerous man. She's making wild accusations, and she's clearly not in a mental state to... Enough. Romaine's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. He stood slowly, and every eye turned to him. Judge Morrison's expression sharpened with warning. Mr. Ruegg, you are not a lawyer. Sit down. No. The single word hung in the air like a detonation. Mitchell looked panicked. Rebecca half rose from her seat, but Romaine's attention was fixed entirely on the judge. Your Honor, with respect, you're about to make a decision based on incomplete information. You're being presented with a narrative designed to make me look dangerous and Miss Widmer look desperate. And while both of those things may contain elements of truth, they're not the whole truth, Mr. Ruegg. I'm not finished. Romaine's tone was respectful but unyielding. You want to know who I am? What I've done? I'll tell you. But I'll do it under oath. subject to cross-examination. Because unlike the prosecution, I'm not interested in implications and associations. I'm interested in facts. Judge Morrison studied him for a long, tense moment. You understand that anything you say can be used in future proceedings against you? I understand. And your lawyers are advising against this. They are, Romaine said. I'm doing it anyway. Mitchell looked like he might have a heart attack, but Rebecca was watching Romaine with something like awe recognition of a calculated risk that just might work. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. Very well, Mr. Ruegg. Bailiff, swear him in. Romaine moved to the witness stand with that same controlled grace. As his hand rested on the Bible, Cindy realized what he was doing. He was gambling everything, his freedom, his empire, his carefully constructed walls on the truth, for her, for Jamie, for a family that existed only on paper. The bailiff's voice echoed in the silent courtroom. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Romaine's eyes found Cindy's across the room. I do, he said, and the trap he'd been building for himself finally snapped shut. Webb approached the witness stand like a predator circling wounded prey. His smile was calculated, confident. He had Romaine exactly where he wanted him under oath. On record, vulnerable. Mr. Ruegg, let's start simply. What do you do for a living? I own several businesses, Romaine said calmly. Import-export, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. How profitable are these businesses? Very. Enough to maintain an estate worth $12 million? Yes. Webb's smile widened. And these businesses, they've always been legitimate? The courtroom went silent. Mitchell looked like he might vomit. Cindy's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Romaine didn't hesitate. No. A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly. Could you elaborate? Webb asked, barely containing his triumph. Until approximately 8 months ago, I was involved in activities that existed in legal gray areas. I facilitated transactions between parties who didn't trust traditional banking systems. I mediated disputes that couldn't be resolved through legal channels. I provided services that skirted the edges of the law. You're describing organized crime, Webb said. I'm describing survival in communities where the legal system has failed, Romaine corrected. But yes, if you want to call it organized crime, I won't argue semantics. Cindy felt her world collapsing. He was confessing, giving them everything they needed to destroy both of them. And you expect this court to believe you simply walked away from this life? Webb asked mockingly. I don't expect anything, Romaine said, but I can prove it. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folder. Mitchell looked stunned. This wasn't part of their strategy. Your Honor, Romaine said. May I present evidence? Judge Morrison's expression was unreadable. Approach. Romaine handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. She opened it, her eyes scanning the documents. Her expression shifted surprise, then calculation, then something Cindy couldn't quite read. These are cooperation agreements, Judge Morrison said slowly, with federal prosecutors, dated 7 months ago. Yes, Your Honor. I've been working with law enforcement to dismantle the same networks I once facilitated. I've provided evidence that's led to 14 arrests and the seizure of over $60 million in illegal assets. I've testified in 3 federal cases. I'm currently under witness protection protocols. The courtroom erupted. Webb looked blindsided. Derek's face went pale. Even Mitchell seemed shocked. Why wasn't this disclosed earlier? Judge Morrison demanded. Because the investigations are ongoing, Romaine said. And because my cooperation is predicated on confidentiality. But when the choice is between protecting operational security and protecting a child, the choice is obvious. Webb scrambled to recover. This could be fabricated. How do we know? Call the U.S. Attorney's Office, Romaine said flatly. Ask for Assistant Director Catherine Brennan. She'll confirm everything, though she'll be extremely unhappy that I've revealed this in open court. Judge Morrison was already reaching for her phone. She stepped into her chambers. The wait felt eternal. When she returned, her entire demeanor had changed. Mr. Webb, your theatrics regarding Mr. Ruegg's character are noted but rendered largely irrelevant. According to federal authorities, Mr. Ruegg has indeed been cooperating extensively. His current status is that of a protected witness who has demonstrated significant efforts toward reformation. Webb looked like he'd been punched. Your Honor, regardless of his cooperation with authorities, the fact remains that Miss Widmer married him under suspicious circumstances. Let me address that, Romaine interrupted. He turned his attention fully to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, you asked if I expect this court to believe I simply walked away from my former life. The truth is more complicated. I walked away because I was tired. Tired of violence. Tired of watching people destroy themselves and each other. Tired of being the person everyone feared but no one trusted. His voice softened slightly. And then I met Cindy, not 3 weeks ago. That marriage certificate is backdated because we needed it to be. But the truth is, I met her 6 hours before we walked into that clerk's office. I overheard her crying in a diner, desperate to save her son. And I made a choice. Not because I knew her. Not because I owed her anything. But because, 23 years ago, my mother sat in a similar situation, and every person who could have helped her chose not to get involved. The courtroom was absolutely silent. My mother died believing no one cared enough to risk anything for her. So when I heard Cindy's plea, I decided that this time, someone would care. This time, someone would risk something. Even if it was inconvenient. Even if it was complicated. Even if it exposed me in ways I'd spent years avoiding. He looked at Cindy, his expression unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. I don't love her. I barely know her. But I believe she deserves the chance to be the mother her son needs. And I believe that child deserves better than what the system has offered him. So yes, Your Honor, this marriage is unconventional. It's recent. It's built on desperation and timing. But it's also the most honest thing I've done in years. Because it's not about what I gain. It's about what they don't lose. Judge Morrison sat motionless, her hands folded on the bench, her eyes moving between Romaine, Cindy, and Derek. The silence stretched until Cindy thought she might scream from the tension. Mr. Webb, the judge finally said, do you have any actual evidence of abuse or neglect by Miss Widmer toward her son? Webb shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, while we don't have direct evidence of abuse, the environment she's created by associating with, that's not what I asked. Evidence of abuse or neglect, yes or no? No, Your Honor, but... And Mr. Mitchell's allegations of domestic violence against Miss Widmer, those were investigated by authorities and substantiated? The investigations were inconclusive due to Miss Widmer's refusal to cooperate. Because she was terrified, Cindy said, her voice breaking. She stood, unable to contain it anymore. Your Honor, he broke my ribs. He choked me until I passed out. He told me if I ever reported him, he'd make sure I never saw Jamie again. And he almost succeeded. Judge Morrison's expression softened fractionally. Miss Widmer, I've read the medical reports. I've seen the restraining order you attempted to file before withdrawing it. I understand fear. What I need to understand is whether you're capable of making sound decisions for your child's welfare now. I am, Cindy said firmly. Marrying Romaine might look desperate to you, but it was the sanest decision I've made in years. Because for the first time, someone stood between me and the people trying to destroy me. Someone said, no, this stops here. That's not instability, Your Honor. That's strength. Derek's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, even if we accept Mr. Ruig's reformation, the marriage is clearly a legal maneuver. Of course it is, Judge Morrison said dryly. So is Mr. Mitchell's sudden interest in custody after years of absence. Let's not pretend this courtroom is filled with pure motives. She looked at Derek directly. Mr. Mitchell, when was the last time you saw your son before this custody filing? Derek's jaw tightened. I was in protective custody. I couldn't. That's not what I asked. 18 months, Your Honor. 18 months. And in that time, how many letters did you send him? Phone calls? Video chats? Silence. None, Derek finally admitted. But I was protecting him by staying away. From what? His mother? The woman raising him alone while you enjoyed federal protection and a comfortable living situation? Judge Morrison's voice had an edge now. Mr. Mitchell, I don't doubt you've contributed valuable testimony in your cases, but let's be honest about what this custody claim represents. This isn't about your son's welfare. This is about control over Miss Widmer. Your Honor, I object to this characterization. Objection noted and overruled. I've been a family court judge for 19 years, Mr. Webb. I know vindictive custody battles when I see them. She turned back to Cindy and Romaine. That said, Miss Widmer, your situation is highly irregular. This marriage is days old. Your husband, regardless of his cooperation with authorities, comes from a world most people can't comprehend. Can you honestly tell me you understand what you've gotten yourself and your son into? Cindy looked at Romaine. He met her eyes, and she saw everything he'd risked laid bare. His secrets, his past, His carefully constructed life, all of it exposed in this courtroom because he'd chosen to stand beside her. "No, Your Honor," Cindy said honestly. "I don't fully understand his world. I probably never will. But I understand that he kept his promises. He said he'd give me a house, he did. He said he'd stand beside me in court, he's here. He said Jamie would be safe, and for the first time in months, my son slept through the night without nightmares. I can't predict the future, but I can tell you that right now, this moment, I trust him more than I trust the system that almost separated me from my child." Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her gavel. "I'm going to make a ruling that will likely be appealed, but based on the evidence before me, and more importantly, based on 19 years of watching parents fight over children like property, here's what I see. I see a mother who has survived domestic violence and poverty while keeping her child safe. I see a man with a complicated past who has taken concrete steps toward reformation. And I see a vindictive ex-partner using the legal system as a weapon." She looked directly at Cindy. "Miss Widmer, custody remains with you. Full legal custody. Mr. Mitchell, you'll have supervised visitation rights, pending completion of a family counseling assessment. This court recognizes your marriage to Mr. Ruegg as legal and binding." Cindy couldn't breathe, couldn't process. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "I'm ordering a 6-month review. Social services will conduct regular home visits. If at any point I believe Jamie is in danger, I will not hesitate to revisit this decision. Mr. Ruegg, your cooperation with authorities works in your favor today. Don't make me regret giving you this chance." "You won't, Your Honor," Romaine said quietly. The gavel came down. "This hearing is adjourned." The courtroom cleared slowly, but Cindy couldn't move. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at her hands, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Jamie was hers. The nightmare was over. Except it wasn't over. Not really. Romaine stood beside her, silent and watchful as reporters shouted questions from the hallway, as Derek stormed out with his lawyers, as Mitchell and Rebecca packed their briefcases with barely concealed relief. "Cindy," Romaine said quietly, "we need to get Jamie." "Right. Jamie." Her son was waiting in a room down the hall, probably terrified, probably convinced he was about to be taken away. Cindy stood on shaking legs and followed Romaine through a side door that bypassed the media circus. The moment Jamie saw her, he ran. Cindy dropped to her knees and caught him, holding him so tight she thought her chest might crack open. He was crying, his small body trembling, and she realized she was crying too. "It's okay, baby. You're staying with me. We're going home." "Forever?" Jamie's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "Forever," Cindy promised. She felt Romaine's presence behind them, steady, protective, but keeping his distance, giving them this moment. When she finally looked up, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not quite vulnerability, but something close. Like watching them had reminded him of something he'd lost or never had. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Jamie fell asleep in the back seat almost immediately, exhausted from stress. Cindy watched the city pass by, feeling untethered. Everything had changed in less than 24 hours, and she didn't know how to exist in this new reality. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Expose yourself like that. Risk everything." "Yes, I did," Romaine said simply. "Why?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because some things matter more than protection, more than secrets. You asked me in the diner why I was doing this, and I told you about my mother, but that's not the whole truth." Cindy waited. "The truth is," Romaine continued, his voice low, "I've spent 15 years building walls, becoming untouchable, making sure I never needed anyone and no one could hurt me. And somewhere in all that protection, I forgot what it felt like to actually stand for something. To risk something for a reason that wasn't calculated or strategic." He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "You reminded me, not because you asked for it, but because you were drowning and still fighting, still choosing your son over safety, over comfort, over everything. That kind of courage deserves to be answered." Cindy's throat tightened. "I'm not courageous. I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Romaine said. "It's doing what's necessary despite it." Back at the estate, Helen had prepared lunch, but none of them were hungry. Jamie wanted to see the library Romaine had mentioned, so they walked through the house together, this strange manufactured family trying to figure out what they were to each other. Romaine showed Jamie the shelves of books, pulling down volumes about dinosaurs and prehistoric life. He spoke to her son with unexpected patience, answering questions, never talking down to him. And Jamie, who'd been so afraid of strangers, so traumatized by instability, slowly began to relax. Cindy watched from the doorway, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be transactional, temporary. A legal arrangement that would end when the dust settled. But watching Romaine explain the difference between Cretaceous and Jurassic periods to her 6-year-old son, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want it to end. That evening, after Jamie was asleep in his room, not a car, not a motel, his actual room, Cindy found Romaine on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The rain had finally stopped, leaving everything clean and sharp. "I need to know what happens now," Cindy said, joining him at the railing. "What do you want to happen?" Romaine asked. "That's not fair. You made the offer. You set the terms. I leave when this is over, remember?" "I remember. So when is it over? When does the arrangement end?" Romaine turned to face her fully. In the fading light, his features were softer, less guarded. "It ends when you want it to. Not a day before, not a day after." Cindy's breath caught. "That's not what we agreed." "We agreed you could leave whenever you wanted," Romaine corrected. "We never said you had to." The implication hung between them, heavy, dangerous, full of possibilities neither of them had planned for. "I don't know how to do this," Cindy whispered. "I don't know how to be married to someone I barely know. Someone whose world terrifies me. Someone who what? Someone who makes me feel safer than I've ever felt in my life, and I don't understand why." Romaine's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through. "I don't have easy answers, Cindy. I can't promise you normal. I can't promise you simple. But I can promise you this. You and Jamie are under my protection. Not as property, not as obligation, as choice. My choice. And that means something in my world. It means no one touches you, no one threatens you. No one makes you afraid again." "And if I choose to stay?" Cindy asked, her voice barely audible. "What then?" Romaine reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "Then we figure it out," he said quietly. "Together. One day at a time. No scripts, no calculations. Just possibility." Cindy looked back toward the house, where her son slept peacefully for the first time in months. Then she looked at the man beside her, dangerous, complicated, broken in ways that somehow fit with her own fractures. "Okay," she whispered, "let's try." And in that moment, standing on a terrace under clearing skies, something impossible became real. A family built not on love, but on choice, not on romance, but on respect, not on fairy tales, but on two people who'd survived enough darkness to recognize light when it appeared. Sometimes miracles don't look like heaven. Sometimes they look like a man in a black suit who decides not to walk away. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.